You know what you do if you're Jojopyun? You make Jack impossible for him to catch you like that. You go, oh, is he going to couch it like that? You know what? I'm going to be 1 minute early every scrim. And then I get the 750k and he can't say shit about me. You played right into his hands, Jojo. Even if he was setting you up, you're a moron. You had a gig where you're a 19-year-old kid getting 750k a year and you couldn't even just turn. If it said 9 o'clock, you turned up at 9:05. You know what? I don't have that much sympathy for you on that one, you know. Even though there's the whole IBS thing we can shade into in a minute if you want. What do you think on this opening game?
Well, so first off, Jojo's never going to make that money again, ever.
Oh no! Also, the money's done.
So he really sucked that up.
It's over.
And yes, I do think that, you know, there have been implications from other pro players and people formerly on EG. Like, there's obviously a lot swirling around this and a lot of assumptions, which we can unpack. But, you know, at the end of the day, like the 43 number, and here's the truth, guys. If they go to Worlds, if they win LCS, all of that just gets thrown out, right? Doesn't matter.
Yes.
You know, that's the thing is like, if you are a professional athlete, you can be as much of an asshole as you want, as long as you win games. Like, that's just how the world works.
That even that logic, though, is being used by even people like my mate LS in a way that I think's a bit disingenuous, because they're using it almost like a gotcha. Like, but if you really cared, if you'd have gone to Worlds, you wouldn't have kicked him out. It's like, well, yeah, because that was our actual goal. Like, what? What? That's it. Monty, think about what a mad statement this would be. Oh, so I'll give you the actual example because I gave it in my video. Oh, you know Antonio Brown? Well, in theory, you should do what Belichick did. And even though he scored that touchdown that first game, you should instantly bench him because he's a lunatic, right? But I'll tell you what, if you're on the box and you really want to win that ring and he wins you the ring, at the end, it's justified that you kept him playing even though he was a bit of an utter, right? So either way you do it, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. So I don't even get that angle, bro. Like, what you're saying is, if what I hired you to do, you actually had done, then I wouldn't have fired you over something minor. But if you didn't do what I hired you to do, then I might also fire you over something minor. I don't see that as a contradiction, mate. Well, I think that seems quite consistent to me, actually.
You know, Dennis Rodman was a nut job on the Bulls. You know what I mean? Like, he would literally not show up for games because he was drinking in Vegas and like would just like fucking disappear for weeks, right? Did it matter? No, because they won titles, right? Yes. Like, you just have to understand that that's who this guy was. But, you know, you can justify it as long as you continue winning. And also, look, I like LS, but I really don't think that he has an axe to grind with Cloud9, clearly. And so I think there's like huge motivation for him to spin this in a certain way.
Because I've never done a video on the LS thing, mainly because basically neither party wants that info to come out, guys.
Yeah.
Like neither Cloud9 nor LS wants.
Look, it doesn't look good for anybody.
It's bad for everyone. Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
and
the truth behind that situation makes everybody look bad. And
but by the way, I want to make that clear. It's not just LS though. I'm not saying only LS did some shit and he'd get exposed. They'd all get exposed, so no one wants that info out there. So I've never addressed this. But I will say, here's the problem with that topic. I agree with your take. LS is clearly motivated to have to want to call out what he thinks is Cloud9 corruption or not telling the truth or being disingenuous, right? But the problem I have is this. I think they were way more disingenuous to LS than they were to Jojo. I think the Jojo one's even pretty legit. In fact, actually, when you get into some of the things you've alluded to, like the fact that there isn't even going to be the money to pay people that kind of stuff, that's actually just a very logical reason as to why anyone would want to shed this contract, by the way. So that one's not as bad, but I agree. The LS one was more like that. The thing is, I've got two quick angles though, and then I want to get more of a take, because I know you haven't done Power Spike yet, right? When did you do Power Spike this week?
No, we're not doing it this week, next week.
Oh, right. Because I know you haven't done a show on this topic, so obviously I want to get your take. But I have two little updates for you. So one is even the IBS thing, which you remember technically was outed by Rigby because he stupidly didn't think. Even though this does help defend Jojo, I'm just outing that the guy has to shit himself every day, which he never wanted put on the internet, believe it or not, mate. It's one of the reasons why I made the point, if you remember, when Goyle, the guy who wrote that shitty fucking bad rewrite of Richard's work with a bunch of wrong details in and stuff that never should have been published. I famously made the case that there were a bunch of personal details me and Richard had we didn't publish because for the same reason. I don't know if Danny wants that private information out there. This dickhead just fucking put it on like, lol, check this out. So I already think Rigby fucked up. But anyway, once that's out there, everyone's been basically framed on this topic by Alarim, the former Immortals top laner, right? Because he's come and said, I also, he has Crohn's, not IBS, but I essentially have like stomach issues myself.
A gastrointestinal issue.
Yeah. And what happens is it means that basically it's true. I'm like toilet bound. Sometimes I just wouldn't eat food because I couldn't manage it. Now, here's the problem with that. Again, one, we don't actually know what Jojo has. It's very different if you have Crohn's, if you have IBS, if you have diverticulitis. It's very different. Like if people know the case in Counter-Strike, I always reference that Get Right and Device had some sort of issue. I don't even think theirs was the same issue, and I'm not even sure if it affected them the same way. But what I'll say is this. Some people who actually are in esports, Monty, who have IBS and other gastrointestinal issues, reached out to me and said, that's not even true. They said that's like some boomer shit where they think like Alarim doesn't even know like the latest tech. They say in the modern day, there are literally like drugs and dietary plans and essentially ways you can sort of, like Rigby would say, like prep in advance and get all the, they said basically it is totally plausible to manage it. I mean, by the way, that makes more sense anyway, Monty, because think about this. Surely we'd all know someone who had IBS who would be have like a nightmare career, like they'd never be at bloody work, or they'd miss every meeting or every call. That's not the case, is it? Like they might have to manage it. It might be tricky. There might be sometimes it affects them. But the idea like people are going to do of like, wait a minute, but if sometimes that meant it was a problem, that means he's enabled to miss 43 times. No, he isn't. And then secondly, I'll just throw this out there. I did say this in my video, but I was soft about how I said it. The biggest problem I have goes like this, Monty. The reason I hate the fact that there even might be this stomach issue is because, bro, we have no actual metric to check that that's it real and happening. So it means the second you have the issue, even if Jojo does have that issue, well, he could just say every single day he wants to have a day off. It's flare up again, guys. Oh, am I late? Shit, I'm not actually late. Oh, I had to go to the top. You could split. That excuse could be used. By the way, we used to do this in Counter-Strike. What you do is you say your mouse doesn't work. Well, how can an admin tell you your mouse works fine? You can get a free 10-minute delay anytime you feel like it by saying your mouse doesn't work or it feels wrong. So unfortunately, that already just opens a can of worms that never gets resolved. So I want to know, I've got a whole Riot thing separately, but what do you think about that issue? Because obviously people were trying to find an angle. If you notice, what sucks about this whole topic, bro, is no one was trying to find the nuance or they were trying to pick who wins in the soap opera and who is completely right and who's completely wrong. So what do you think on some of this? Because some of these nuance is actually the most interesting part to me.
Let me tell you some things I know about Cloud9, right? Like Cloud9, they do mandatory workouts for players. They cater all the players' food. And so it is hard for me to believe that if Jojo was disclosing this medical issue that he has, that Cloud9 would not be doing things as an org that, in my experience of working there and working with their players, is very health focused. So like I would have thought, and maybe I could be wrong, but basically the identity of that org is, pretty focused on player health. So I would be surprised if they were not doing anything if they knew about it. We also don't know about, personal responsibility about that. We also don't know. There's a red line, guys, that you have to be very careful not to cross. And it sounds like, okay, the EG org was doing a lot of, it sounds like from the coaches who said he was very professional, when he was with EG and that they were managing this. Sure, that's fine. But you guys have to remember that there is a questionable line that an employer has when crossing an employee's, like a line that they could cross about their health issues, right? Where they become liable in certain ways. And given that EG was, to put it mildly, unprofessionally run, it is possible in my mind that EG was potentially crossing some legal boundaries in the way that they were dealing with Jojo, that Cloud9 may not have been. I think it's really hard to say. We don't have enough details to be really explicit about this. And I think that the reality of the situation is this. So we can toss out all of these other ideas because here's the reality of the economics of the scene, which I will disclose to you. And this is the shit you only get here on Summoning Insight, which is as follows. The stipends in the year 2024 for the LCS teams went up to about $2.5 million. Now, the reason why this happened was because of esports winter, all the teams saying, hey, Riot, we're totally fucked. Okay. So Riot was like, okay, here's some more money. Because they knew that, obviously the PR around the collapse of some of these teams. And some of these teams were like very close.
If you remember, the average number I reported in 2023 was, I think almost every team was losing at least $1 million running a team.
Yeah. So effectively, like there was an increase in stipend, which allowed many of these teams to run profitably. Now, what you have to understand about Cloud9, and I did some checking around with the teams, because you remember, as you guys know from Travis Gafford, ranking the team spends, all the teams know what each other spends, and that's all disclosed. So I can tell you guys that Cloud9 was spending the most money of any LCS team this year. So they had a very large budget. Now they have sponsors, right? And sometimes with these sponsors, and I don't know whether this was specific to Cloud9 or not, you get part of that money conditionally on whether you make Worlds, because obviously the exposure for the brand is huge. So effectively, it's possible that Cloud9 received less money as a result of not making Worlds. Now, simultaneously to all of this, and this is, I speculated when we heard about when Riot made the announcement about having to cut 2 teams, you ask yourself, okay, how are they going to incentivize these teams to leave? Because many of the teams that you would want to leave the LCS are running profitably right now. So why would they leave? Why would they get rid of this asset that they had? And the thing that they did is that, so when there's a legal document called the TPA, or Team Participation Agreement, that exists between Riot and the teams. And this document is the contract about franchising, okay? And they franchised in 2017, and it was a 7-year contract. So this year is the year that they were renegotiating the team participation agreement, okay? And what Riot has done is that they have, like what they did with Valorant, guys, is they've shifted some of the money into performance metrics. And by performance metrics, I mean like fan engagement, okay? So this means that some of the smaller teams that you would want potentially kicked out of the LCS because they've been, competitively underperforming, or, not spending money, not developing fan bases for years, are all of a sudden in a situation next year where they would probably be losing money because the stipends, the floor of those stipends is going down. And what I have been told is that even the performance metrics, Thorin, that they've introduced now are basically impossible to hit. Like, especially in a game that is declining when it comes to viewership, especially LCS, which has massively declined over the years, even though it's slightly up this summer compared to last summer. That was, again, we talked about that last episode, but that was like the player walkout and all that nonsense. So effectively, like, a lot of these teams were looking at it and they're like, well, we're not going to be profitable anymore. We're going to start losing money again. We have no way to, nobody really has a way to meet these metrics, but especially, Immortals, right? Especially NRG potentially. NRG, I think, had different motivations for selling, which I'll get into in a little bit, once we pass the Jojo topic. But effectively, I think Cloud9 was probably staring down some combination of being the most expensive team in the league, being on the hook for this Jojo contract, not making Worlds, which hurts, even if it didn't hurt their sponsorship dollars now, which it may well have, because there could have been, if you got $1 million deal from a sponsor, maybe 300,000 of that deal was contingent on you making Worlds. So now you only get 700,000. That fucks up your budget. And also, if you're selling sponsors for next year, it becomes harder to negotiate with future sponsors when you're like, oh, we didn't make Worlds, right? And they're like, well, how are you going to make Worlds now?
A subtle point I actually made, Monty, that a lot of people miss, but you will know, is back in the day, part of the genius that Alex Garfield had with EG in the early 2010s was he understood that since his sponsors were North American, it didn't matter that his team in Counter-Strike wasn't the best in the world. As long as he could say, I'm the champion of North America, he got all of his sponsor budget, Monty. It didn't matter that he wasn't going to win the equivalent of Worlds, the major in CS, etc. All he had to do was just go, we won ESEA, was the Counter-Strike tournament at the time. We won ESEA, so we're the North American champion, therefore we're number one in our region. Give me all the sponsorship money. And he used to be able to, as a result, get more money for being number one than like Fnatic would for being like number one in all of Counter-Strike in the world, because they only have the European budget. So I wouldn't even be surprised if to this day, sponsors don't really expect you to win Worlds, but if you're Cloud9, they probably at least want you in the final or win LCS, right? That's probably still, like, I imagine, by the way, winning the LCS that has the stadium event's probably a big deal too for exposure.
Yep. Yeah. So look, I think like there is a combination of factors where we know things that we know, the team participation agreement, which we assume is set now because they announced all these other details of the Americas League, the lowering of the floor of the stipend, the expense of the Cloud9 roster, and the fact that they didn't, win a split or go to Worlds is, I think all of these factors, and they basically, as you say, Thorin, they kind of laid a trap for Jojo, where I'm sure they were telling him to be on time, but then what they probably did was they probably meticulously documented his lateness, and then they're going to get involved with some lawyers, and the lawyers are going to fight it out now in order to kind of void his contract.
Actually sort of, I know this will sound weird, guys, but the reason why you can't just be the cool owner and then just fire him afterwards is because since you're in California where they've got all these insane labor laws, you actually better have all the paper trail. You need to do something like, I'm sure be able to show in court you was late 40 times. That's really important, actually. Yeah. So like, I do think they probably have a leg to stand on here when it comes to, and here's the other thing that I will say.
about Jojo's potential stomach issues that I find very suspicious, Thorin. How come there were never match delays on game days? How come Keria was literally taking bathroom breaks in a stadium during the LCK finals weekend?
Yep.
I don't recall that happening with Jojo. So it's very weird that he would have 43 delays for practices, but as far as I am aware, we would have no delays in on-stage games.
Well, here's where I can shade in from some of my sources in the NA scene and Cloud9. I was told in the Mithy administration of Cloud9 that Jojo also used to be late then, Monty, but since all they ran back then was just a basic fine system, I heard he just sort of ate the fines and everyone was kind of chill about it. They were like, whatever, as long as he plays, who gives a fuck? So I think actually it sounds like within Cloud9, they maybe changed focus in the summer with this Reapered version. And then also, I think also the big shadow, that's why I saved it till now, is the whole fucking stipend thing. Because here's the problem, Monty. Do you want to know who's not getting the blame at all about this situation? But it's obvious they should be one of the main parties. Riot Games. Like, how am I supposed to imagine this, Monty? Imagine we're in the NFL, me and you have franchises. And then the salary cap, I'll make up a random one. The salary cap, I'm going to make 150 million, right? So imagine I spend for the most expensive max contract I do. I sign, in this analogy, I'd have to be like Patrick Mahomes or some, or Lamar Jackson, right? I sign some max contract player, and then you tell me after 1 year of playing with him, oh, did you sign like a 3-year deal with him? Well, bad luck. Next year, the salary cap's 100 million. Like, what the fuck? Like... Bro, how am I supposed to run a business? So one, Riot has literally incentivized Cloud9 and other orgs to shed these contracts. By the way, even technically, if he'd have been the MVP of the league this split, they'd be incentivized to shed it. Because here's what you'd do, Monty. You'd shed it now and then say, but I'll sign you back for 500k instead of 750. You know, you'd do some deal like that. Even if it was just that you still wanted to play. It's too much money. Because next year, if I'm going to get less stipend, that means I'm just, even if it's the identical contract, I'm paying more of my money for that salary. It doesn't make sense. But everyone keeps ignoring that one. So unfortunately, I can see why, especially when you fuck up LCS and Worlds, you're like, you know what? Wipe the deck. Let's get rid of the biggest contract. Oh, was that the guy also who I documented was late 40 times? You're out, sunshine. And then obviously, I mean, the other part I revealed is apparently they've been trying to sell them to like LEC orgs. And here's what's funny. I even think that got lost on fans. I forgot to mention it in my video. That's weird money. Why would you sell them to LEC orgs? Because who the fuck has money in LCS? Who the fuck has money in it? Nobody is the answer. Do you want to know how bad it is, LCS and Riot Global? Because I'm going to clown on Riot Global big time right now. Riot Global basically is the LCS. It was their fucking like favorite child the whole time. Meanwhile, even LEC was the redheaded stepchild who had to be the fucking like the booster broadcast beforehand to like fluff the crowd. Then the fucking bull could come in and fuck LCS big time for all the big money. And remember this, Monty, when I tell you this detail, it will show you how badly Riot has misplayed their hand. Another in the classic cadre of you fucked up the subscription model of OGN, you never allowed LPL to have proper casters and world-class coverage, you kept LEC a bitch sister broadcast to the LCS, and then what did you do with the LCS? Well, remember this detail, Monty. When they started franchising, famously, my mate Carlos was like, oh, in that case, can I buy into the LCS with G2? Because that's way better to make money than Europe. NA has all those budgets. The joke now is these orgs would fucking crawl across broken glass to get into the LEC, which is a bigger league with way better, and even now, arguably, potentially bigger sponsor opportunities. That's how badly they fucked up the LCS. So the reason why they're offering to LEC teams, guys, is the difference is if you're a G2 or Fnatic, you can actually pay a big box for this guy. If you want to break the bank, you can actually afford this contract. It might be worth your while to even do, because remember, Jax doesn't want to lose money on this. He is a businessman. So I think that part is so misunderstood. Like no one in this equation is blaming Riot. Like I said, Monty, how is that not a bad faith move from Riot? Oh. I'm going to allow you to get yourself into a multi-year contract and then tell you, oh, by the way, next year I'm just giving you less money. I'm just going to fuck with your margins directly. That's like a tax on the fucking orgs.
Yep. And like this is the problem that's going on is that, you know, you guys are trying to like, I think everybody is focused on the wrong thing here. People are focused on blaming Cloud9 or blaming Jojo. We need to blame the fact that this is a fucking broken business model. If it wasn't for money, guys, none of this shit would be happening.
No, of course not.
So, like, you know, and by the way, $750,000 for Jojo is literally less money than people like Afram who used to make an LCS. Like, as far, you know, it's literally a third of what Bjergsen made on Team Liquid, right? It's not big money in the history of LCS, but it is big money right now. But that goes to show again how much player salaries have fallen. And yeah, the teams used to lose a bunch of money doing this. Yeah, I mean those days are behind us, and the hope in losing that money was to provide enough entertainment and growth for the business to catch up, but it never did, and Riot's not interested in fixing it. They're just fundamentally uninterested in fixing the business model for the teams, which is why you see all of the movements that we've seen right now, because everybody whose responsibility it is to fix the business model into a sustainable path has abdicated that responsibility. John Needham, conveniently, he has another job now in publishing that, he's still head of esports, but how could he do both of those jobs at the same time? Because fixing the business model of esports is a more than full-time job. Oh, Naz, she was the head of LoL esports. Conveniently, right after when esports winter hit, took a sabbatical, then just quit. It's like, it's a shit job because they haven't figured out, or they're not willing to figure it out. But this pattern is just going to continue. But this whole Jojo thing, people get mired in the details of the being late or his medical conditions. And the other thing that I hate, Thorin, is like, obviously we like a lot of the EG coaches and the EG staff, Peter Dunn, people who came out. Yeah. But like, respectfully, Peter Dunn, he may have been good for you, but like, how do you know what he's like now? He could have been a horrible teammate now. You don't know that. And especially, I hate to tell you guys, but when people sign the big paycheck, when they get the big money, sometimes they change. Sometimes you can't know. Like he could have been the worst teammate ever after signing the big deal with Cloud9. And maybe it's not. Maybe
Monty, if you want to look at environment, there's no player in Cloud9 who's a mentor, like bigger brother figure. If you think about the team they had in EG, bro, they had Impact, they had Inspired, like they had Peter himself, like bro, they actually had like Impact in that team. I've heard it was like the fucking like the Dawn. Everyone fucking revered this guy. In Cloud9, their vibe is like we're all just skilled kids with hands. Like it's if there ever was someone going to misbehave, it'd be in that team. Makes me more
They
sense.
also didn't have the robust coaching staff. Remember, it was just Mithy into just Reaper. Hi isn't a coach, guys. He's just a team manager.
I want to ask you about, because you're the one who said this. People also are blaming that detail. Like, well, where were all the coaches? Weren't it you that revealed? Well, they had to get rid of him and get fucking Jojo. That's because it was a bidding war, wasn't there? Like,
like basically, they just didn't have money for coaches because this team was so expensive to create, and they had the highest budget team. And like, obviously, Jack and the C9 leadership have an obligation to their board during esports winter, probably to not run at too much of a loss. Maybe they were profitable because again, those stipends went way up. So they didn't want to overinvest, and they thought, well, we've got this super team. Like, how much coaching could they possibly need? Turns out, a lot, as we learned. But that wasn't the thought process, I think, going into this one. And when, also it may not even be like Jojo may have been unmotivated on C9 compared to EG. I don't know if this is true, but it also could have been because of a bad environment with his teammates. Maybe none of this is Jojo's fault, as it were. Maybe like he had a really shitty time with the teammates that he had, and that was creating a bad environment where he didn't want to show up on time. And yes, that's still his fault. It's still unprofessional, but maybe there are reasons for it, right? We just can't know. And so I feel like all of the speculation by the EG coaches is really just weird because they can't possibly know what he was like within the Cloud9 team house. So like, why are we going to bat for him?
And also, mate, I even did this in my video, because even if I like you and I have a past history, if you're just full of shit, you're full of shit. And I am absolutely the person who pointed out. If you're Kelsey Moser, I don't ever want to hear you mention that other orgs might be shady. You've never spoken about what EG did to Danny. Shut your fucking mouth. There you go. How about that? How about clean up your own fucking house before you start talking about someone else's being dirty? What the fuck are you talking about? Wind your fucking neck back in. As long as if you want that to all stay in the past and never bring it up, then shut the fuck up talking about other people's problems. That's a totally consistent position. By the way, the reason I'll allow Peter Dunn to do it, Monty, is Peter Dunn gave his fucking job up because of that situation. He couldn't live with that situation. That's actually what I have the most time for Peter Dunn in this equation, because I actually do believe he has the best in mind for Danny, and he does care about coaching environments. He does care about. He's proven all that by putting his money where his mouth is, bro. So respect to him. Some of the others were clownish though. Like the worst one was that one I regged on, that Razdan guy who was like, "Stop spreading disinformation and use real words." It's like, so disinformation is other people's actual experience that you didn't have. Like, you're a fucking idiot, mate. And spoiler, weren't you only a coach because Peter Dunn left and they had no money left in esports when it happened? Like, shut the fuck up. You know what I mean? I don't know about that. I don't know about that one. Sadly, though, it was another example of like a giant drama where, as I said, I actually feel like I'll probably do a follow-up about some of these issues, but I feel like most people did just want the soap opera angle of like, who is the bad guy, basically. And then the obvious options were, it was either Jack from Cloud9, Jojo, or I don't know, a coach or something. That's probably about it, right?
By the way, guys, let me tell you a little bit about esports. The bad guy is always Riot. Okay, it's always Riot. It's always the developer, because they're the ones who have failed to deliver on their promise to create sustainable businesses for the teams. And that's why the Saudis are involved. Like, Riot doesn't have to let Saudi Arabia use their intellectual property. They don't have to let them do that. Okay. So it's the teams are pressuring them to do it, right? The teams are doing that, but the teams are pressuring them to do it because there's never been, a successful media rights deal, and there's never been revenue sharing off skins, and, an understanding of transparency around the marketing efforts of esports, right? So it's always Riot. Like, people will act badly. Sure. I'm not saying the teams are absolved of responsibility, or Jojo's absolved of responsibility. Like, people will act badly, but the reason they are acting badly is because of the money situation within the esports ecosystem. That's why they're doing it, guys. If that was solved, I think people would act better. That's my take. Hot take.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.